I've been creating videos for the past 4 years, and in that time, I've learned a lot about the video creation process. As a beginner, videography can be incredibly overwhelming, needing a solid understanding of frame rates, shutter speeds, composition, shot sequences, gear. The list genuinely goes on and on. However, if you've just started your journey with videography, today I'm going to walk you through the 7 things that I wish I had have known when I first started, which would have put me miles ahead and given me the knowledge I would have needed to progress quicker and make far better videos. Okay, tip number 1, you want to make sure you're using an ND filter so you're able to follow the 180-degree shutter rule to a T. Just quickly, for anyone that doesn't know what the 180-degree shutter rule is, it took me quite a few months to work this out. It's when your shutter speed is double your frame rate. For example, let's say you're shooting in 25 frames per second like we are right now, my shutter speed is 1/50. Or let's say I was shooting in 50 frames per second, my shutter speed would want to be 1/100. No more and no less. Now this sounds all well and good, but what happens when you go and take your camera out and it's really bright outside? All of a sudden you can only increase your aperture so much before it looks really strange, things get unsharp, or you just have no depth of field whatsoever, and you can only decrease your ISO to as low as it can go, and then how else do you make your image dark? Because you can't crank that shutter speed and make it higher, otherwise things are gonna look super strange. Well, that is where a variable ND filter comes into play. And a variable ND filter, for lack of better terminology, are like sunglasses for your camera lens. All you've got to do is take your variable ND filter, screw it onto the front of your lens, and then you can rotate it to make your image darker. Now this makes following the 180-degree shutter rule so easy, and it ensures that you're always gonna have true to life motion blur in your shots. Okay, next up on the chopping block, tip number 2 is to shoot in manual mode to make sure your camera isn't changing any settings halfway through your shot. Let's say, for example, you were shooting in auto, or not even auto, let's say you were shooting with auto ISO on. For some instances, this works, but if you were creating videos, let's say you were sitting down talking to the camera like this, or you're out shooting cinematic content, whatever it may be, let's say you're in the middle of a shot and all of a sudden, your shot gets brighter or your shot gets darker because your camera has realized things are a little too dark or things are a little too bright. We need to adjust the exposure, and it's gonna do it in the middle of your shot. Far from ideal. And the easiest way to avoid this, of course, is to make sure you're shooting with manual settings and everything is dialed in by you. And please don't think that you'll just be able to color grade the exposure change out. That's never gonna work. It's an absolute headache. Alrighty, tip number 3, don't always shoot with the lowest aperture possible. I'll put my hands up and say this was me. Not even that long ago, this was me. And I'll tell you why. When you get a new lens, let's say it's a nice prime lens, or let's say it's a 50mm f1.8, which is a beautiful prime lens, it might be your first time playing around with the f1.8 aperture, and everything is all of a sudden shot at f1.8. But I can promise you this, you wanna make sure that you can get good shots without just relying on a low aperture, because the day might come where you can't shoot with a low aperture, or the day might come where you're shooting with the 24-105 f4 and all of a sudden you can't just blur out the background. Now you really need to think and challenge yourself on composition. There is a time and a place for a low aperture, don't get me wrong, and I love the look of it. But not every shot needs to be shot with a super low aperture, so keep that in mind. And just a heads up, if you can take a really good shot without using a super low aperture, your composition skill, through the roof. You must be getting very good at videography. So if you can practice this and get better at taking a good composition without needing to use a really low aperture, I promise you, you'll progress quickly. All right, we are absolutely flying through these. Tip number 4, make sure that you are shooting a wide array of things when you're out shooting. When I'm out shooting, I like to practice something called the 3-shot rule. And that is to make sure I get a wide, medium, and close-up shot of everything I shoot. And that is because when I get back and I'm in the edit, I want to make sure that I have got at least a wide, medium, and close-up of every subject, every setting, every landscape, every whatever it is, to make sure I can tell the best story possible. And this was a big mistake that I made when I first started shooting video. I would simply just shoot everything super wide, and I'd have like 20 wide establishing shots, one after the other, after the other, after the other in a sequence, and that was it. And I didn't understand what I was doing wrong. And sure enough, it was because I wasn't getting any of the details. I wasn't zooming in or getting closer to anything whatsoever. And it just kind of felt a little distant and weird and a completely strange vibe. I'll put some good examples on screen now of a close, a medium, and a wide shot, and then a wide shot, a medium, and a close shot. And you can see how it kind of draws you in and out of the video much easier than just super wide shots or just all detail shots. You've got to have some kind of variety. And speaking of telling a better story, the sponsor of today's video, Motion Array, helps you do just that with their incredible sound effects, stock footage, motion graphic templates, plugins, and music libraries, plus a load of other digital assets to help you tell a better story in your videos. Motion Array covers you nearly every step of the way in the video creation journey and makes it so easy to integrate into your workflow. If you've watched any of my videos in the past, you'll know that I'm a complete sucker for a good film burn transition. And that's because they are such a nice way to be able to cut between hard cuts and transition between them. And Motion Array has a giant library of film burns just waiting to be downloaded and used in your next project. So if you're looking for a one-stop shop to be able to put incredible videos together with ease, look no further than Motion Array. Right now, you can get $50 off the annual Motion Array subscription using the link down below in the description. And thanks once again, Motion Array, for sponsoring today's video. All right, moving on to tip number 5, don't underestimate the power of a still shot. I'm guilty of this even to this day, but something I've been playing around with quite a lot recently is slowing down and capturing still shots. No movement. Still shots can be just as powerful, if not even more powerful, than shots with movement in them. Not every shot needs to be moving. There's already enough stuff moving in our world as is. So do yourself a favor, set up your tripod, get your composition absolutely dialed in, hit record, and capture some still shots. All right, tip number 6, having a basic understanding of frame rates is gonna get you a long way. Let's break them down. Okay, so the main reason you're gonna wanna change and use different frame rates is when you're gonna wanna slow your footage down. When you're shooting in 24 or 25 FPS, you're getting real life, no slow motion. So you can't slow this footage down. It looks super natural. It's best used to kind of make things a little bit more dramatic, feel like the viewer was actually there, or make the viewer feel like they were actually there, and perfect for talking headshots just like this. I don't need to slow down this footage ever. All right, next up is 50 or 60 FPS, and this is gonna get you half speed. And just quickly, I say 50 or 60 FPS, and that is because depending on where you're from, where you bought your camera from, or what setting your camera currently has on it, is gonna depend on whether you can shoot in 50 or 60 FPS. I believe North America shoots in 60 FPS, and for example, in Australia, where I'm from, shoots in 50 FPS. It has something to do with the electronic frequency on televisions. I don't understand the science behind it. It's just how cameras work. So back to 50 or 60 FPS, half speed. I shoot a load of my B-roll and nearly all of my cinematic stuff in 50 frames per second, and that's because I can slow it down to half speed. I can get a little bit more out of my clip. I can make it seem a little bit more slow, moody, and dramatic, which is exactly the vibe I'm after. Not really that fast-paced, go-getter dramatic vibe, but more of the slower, moody, dramatic vibe. And last but not least is 100 or 120 FPS, and this is gonna get you quarter speed. I'll be honest, I personally never use this, and I don't know many professional filmmakers that do. Sure, being able to slow down your footage to quarter speed makes things easier, makes clips seem smoother, and doesn't require as much effort as when you're shooting in 24 or 25 or even 50 or 60 FPS, but it also looks a little cheap, and I think it's too slow. I'm not a fan of 100 FPS whatsoever, but it does have its place if you really need to slow down your footage. All right, tip number 7, don't worry about the gear. This one crippled me when I first started out. And I know what you might be thinking. It's so easy for me to say, don't worry about the gear when I've already got all of the gear. Just don't worry about it. But the thing is, when you're first starting out, you don't want all the gear and you don't need all the gear. And even if you had all the gear, believe me, you wouldn't even be able to take full advantage and your videos would look more or less the same. I can tell you right now that more camera gear equals more headache and more creative fatigue. Let's say you go out to shoot and you've got 10 lenses with you. Well, you're gonna spend probably half, if not more of the time changing lenses and then just shooting. This is far from ideal. Honestly, whatever camera you have right now, even if you're just shooting with your phone, the best thing you can do is to go out, shoot, have fun, get better, and repeat. And over time, you will maybe turn this into a career. You will maybe have more budget to spend on camera gear in the future, and you'll start to buy and accumulate more gear that will just make you a better filmmaker in the long run, but don't worry about it right now. Just shoot with what you've got, Believe me, it's more than enough. If it captures video, you're good to go. All right, guys, and that is gonna wrap up today's video. 7 beginner videographer tips that I wish I had have known when I first started out. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you learned anything today, let me know what it was in the comments down below. If you're new around here, a subscribe would mean the absolute world. Once again, thank you to Motion Array for sponsoring today's video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.